Audio made possible by www.jackettomeme.com. Warning. The following has suggestive content that is not suitable for some listeners. Audio Fanfiction Productions presents Wide Awake. Fanfiction written by Angskata003. Fanfiction inspired by the Twilight Saga written by Stephanie Meyer. Chapter 30. Brown Sugar Burdens.
Edward's point of view. I raked my fingers through my hair and knit my eyebrows together at all the assortments. Fucking flowers. There were colors everywhere, and they still all looked the same to me. I sighed and shook my head, turning around the florist shop to find out where the hell my wingman went. I didn't know the first thing about this shit, and since Brandon had already given Jez a lengthy crash course in floral wisdom, I dragged his ass along with me. He agreed without much hesitation, and then ended up fucking disappearing on me, bastard. I eventually found him standing beside a bucket of roses, pursing his lips at them with his hands shoved in his holy jean pockets. I quirked an eyebrow at him. "Roses?" I asked dryly. "Pretty fucking cliché. Brandon would never be satisfied with that shit." He snorted at me. "Alice would never be satisfied with that shit," he muttered, shaking his head and echoing my thoughts so exactly, it freaked me out a little. He cleared his throat and waved me over to another I Love Flowers. I followed him through the aisles curiously, wondering how much help he could actually be. He strode to a purple bouquet of flowers, and plucked them from their basket, turning to face me and raising his eyebrows. "These are carnations. Some people think that they lack class, but it's a fact that they are an exceptionally beautiful flower." He sniffed the bouquet, his grubby blonde hair grazing them in a stark contrast, as he held my gaze. "Purple flowers represent dignity and royalty. An arrangement filled with purple blooms represents accomplishment and admiration," he said in a matter-of-fact tone. And I kind of fucking gaped at his grubby ass, standing there lecturing me on flowers, like he was reading notes that Brandon made him study. He rolled his eyes at me. "You get these for me, not Bella." He tossed them in my hands, where I caught them, while I still stared at him in shock. He moved to another basket, plucking up a bouquet of yellow flowers, turning to me with a serious expression. "She thinks I don't know, but daisies are Elisa's favorite. Yellow represents light-heartedness, joy, and friendship. It's also Elisa's favorite color. You'll get brownie points." He tossed them into my arms along with the purple flowers, and moved on to another basket. He pursed his lips, plucking up individual flowers, and arranging them while speaking. "Alice has to be more significant." I gawked at him while he slid 2 types of flowers into a plastic bouquet wrapper. "White lilies represent innocence and reverence. They're elegant and slightly majestic." He furrowed his brows in concentration, and began adding blue flowers. "The deep blues of an iris can calm worries and preoccupation, representing peace, openness, and serenity." He nodded at the finished arrangement in his hands, and tossed them at me with pretty fucking smug expression. I was so fucking disturbed. It was like hearing him read Drama Cosmopolitan, or some shit. I stared at his smug smirk in equal parts awe and worry. "Jez, dude," I started in a disapproving voice, shaking my head slowly. "I think your vagina is showing." I choked. His smirk fell, as he narrowed his eyes at me. "Fuck you, prick," he growled, spinning on his heel and leaving the shop, while I continued gawking at his back, pretty fucking troubled by his complete knowledge of all things floral. I didn't apologize on the way to his house, but I did thank him. That shit was just so on Jez that he couldn't be shocked by my reaction. He eventually blew it off, getting out of the car, and shooting me a pointed glance that said, "No more vagina jokes, bitch." When I got home at 4, with 3 fucking bouquets of flowers, Carlisle quirked an eyebrow at me in interest as I passed his study. I rolled my eyes as I passed, not stopping, and not looking at him. "Don't fucking ask," I muttered, shaking my head and continuing up the stairs to my room, feeling really ridiculous. If Brandon was expecting me to dress up or some bullshit, she had another thing coming. I didn't even want to waste the money on buying that bitch flowers. But Jez was right. I needed the brownie points. So I sucked it up and left at 5. wearing a plain black shirt and dark jeans with my leather jacket. Simplicity. My girl liked it like that anyways. I walked across the yard glaring at the yellow flowers, and feeling even more ridiculous at the thought of someone seeing me fucking nosy neighbors. I walked up the steps to the pastel blue door, and knocked without hesitation. At least I'd get to spend some extra time with my girl. Can't all be horrible. Esme answered, "Thank God." She smiled sweetly at me, stepping aside to allow me entrance. I stepped into the entryway, mentally shaking my head at myself as I turned to face her, and held out the purple bouquet of flowers. She looked at them wide-eyed in front of her, making me feel even more fucking ridiculous, before her face lit up into a huge smile.
"Oh, Edward,"
she gasped, taking them from my hand and smelling them with a smile.
"how sweet of you, dear,"
she cooed as she stood on her tiptoes to give me a kiss on my cheek. Pleased by the less mortifying reaction, I smiled back as she took my jacket and followed her into the living room, feeling a little more confident about this whole flower charade. Brandon was perched on the couch and stood as I entered the room, smiling at me tightly. I rolled my eyes and walked over to her, fucking battling to keep myself from muttering a particularly offensive string of profanities as I held out the ugly yellow daisies to her. And then it happened again. Her face lit up into a wide, genuine smile as she took the flowers from my hand and smelled them, closing her eyes in reverence. Fucking Jess, and his fucking brilliant floral wisdom. I smirked down at her as she finally opened her eyes. Her smile fell as she caught my smirk, lifting her nose in the air all indignant-like, and setting the flowers on the table like she didn't fucking love them.
"Bella's in the kitchen,"
she sniffed, flopping onto the couch and flipping through the channels on the television indifferently. I rolled my eyes and turned away to leave the room. Esme passed me in the hall, stopping to pat me on the shoulder.
"Don't ask her if she needs help. Trust me,"
she whispered with a serious expression, walking past me and into the living room. I snickered and made my way to the kitchen, where my girl was most likely bogarting the cooking duties. When I entered the doorway to the kitchen, I could see her in front of the stove with her back to me, and it was her, but it wasn't. All the breath escaped my lungs in a whoosh as I gazed at her back. She was wearing tight jeans that made her little ass look so fucking edible. And a red shirt, with sleeves that stopped just below her elbows. Her hair wasn't curly or wavy, but instead shiny and straight as a board. I shook my head and leaned my shoulder against the doorway with a smile, driving out all the shock at seeing my girl dressed in regular girl clothes so that I could analyze her in her element. The kitchen. I clutched her flowers against my stomach as I watched her stir something in a pot that smelled really fucking good. She was humming a song I had put on her iPod for her, occasionally moving her hips ever so slightly, and bobbing her head, making her straight hair sway behind her. She looked so fucking beautiful and domestic as she hummed and stirred. And just so comfortable and warm. Suddenly, she stopped humming, and let out a quiet chuckle.
"You can come in, Edward. I won't bite,"
she said softly, still chuckling at the pot without turning to me. I rolled my eyes and walked into the kitchen. She was always so fucking intuitive. I put her flowers down on the countertop and strode over to the stove, impatient to be closer to her. She didn't flinch as I came up to her back and snaked my arms around her little waist. I buried my nose into the back of her head and breathed in deeply. I removed one arm from her waist to pull all the shiny